You're welcome. It's a pleasure.
Hi there.
Hi, welcome. Thank you all. Like I said, we'll just give everybody a couple more bits here to log on. And if anyone wants to ask any starting questions, feel free, but hopefully we'll go over everything in our introduction for the social exchange, which we'll start here in a minute. I do appreciate everyone joining, though. It's so exciting as we've adapted here to the virtual format to grow our guest lists, and we appreciate people taking time out of their midday to join these important discussions. So let's be prompt and get started right here at 12:30. Thank you again for everyone joining Operation New Hope's Social Exchange. My name is Amanda Mahan. I am the Director of Marketing Communications here at Operation New Hope. And Operation New Hope, we are located in Jacksonville, Florida. We provide reentry services to people who are returning from incarceration or have history of criminal justice involvement. And our goal is to help match people with employment partners to help people earn living wage work so that they can be more integrated into their communities, break the cycle of incarceration, and break out the cycle of poverty as well. So we are so fortunate to have the support of a lot of different community partners, and some of them are with us here today to talk about reentry reform. So our conversation today will be with three different panelists, and I again thank you each for taking time. We have Dr. Carrie Pettus-Davis. She is a professor at Florida State University. We have Freda King. She is the program director at the Reentry program at Dis Village in Tallahassee. And we have Katie Bohnett. She is a lobbyist for Reform Alliance, also out of Tallahassee. So it's interesting that all of our panels come from Tallahassee today. It was just an interesting coincidence. But we are thankful for your partnership and taking the time. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now. We have a quick little intro, and then I'll just turn it over to the panelists who have joined us. So let's get the screen share going. And if someone can make sure my screen is sharing correctly. Oh, I don't think it is. Can you all see my slide presentation?
Yeah, looks good.
Great, fantastic. Okay, so like I said, we're here at Operation New Hope. We believe second chances matter, and we focus our work on helping people find work after incarceration.
Hey, Amanda.
Yes?
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but if you have two screens, you might be sharing not the one that you want, like not the presentation screen.
Oh, thank you. So maybe that we are sharing, does it look like I'm sharing my back screen?
Yeah, like we're seeing your next slide and whether or not
yeah.
Yeah.
Let's see if I can figure out how to fix that. Does this work better?
So far, it's just blue.
Yeah, thanks. Well, we'll just do it this way, and you guys can see the back end. How about that? I appreciate it. Like I said, we've got our three panelists, and we'll do a brief introduction here, and then we're going to move on into the panel discussion. And then after that, we'll have a group discussion where we can do question and answer. And I invite everyone to feel free to speak up, raise your hand if you feel like there's you need to interject. If you have any questions, you certainly can type them in the chat and we can work that way as well. And then we'll have a wrap up towards, we like to keep it right at an hour here, wrap it up at 1:30. We have our Ready for Work client graduations are at 1:30 on Fridays here at Operation New Hope. So we have to run off and celebrate our clients who have completed the program this afternoon. So without further ado, we'll move on. And the topic today is centering on reentry reform. You know, we all want safe communities and we want people to be held accountable for their actions. But here at Operation New Hope, we believe that the collateral consequences following incarceration should not constitute a second sentence. There are just so many barriers to people who are returning from incarceration or have been impacted by the criminal justice system. Oftentimes, there are barriers to housing or transportation, job skills training, employment opportunities. So the work we focus on is supporting people in those arenas, right? So, because we know without the support for housing and transportation, job training, mental health and substance abuse counseling, case management, people are more likely to reoffend, and the rates of recidivism continue to increase when interventions aren't used. So we believe that securing a living wage job is key to reintegrating into the community. It reduces reliance on state assistance and helps break that cycle of incarceration. And because we all know that that cycle of incarceration negatively affects communities by creating unsafe neighborhoods. It hurts children and families, and it perpetuates poverty. So like I said, today's conversation on reentry reform is going to feature 3 different panelists. One, thank you to Dr. Carrie Pettus-Davis. She is an associate professor at Florida State University in social work, and she is a director of the Institute for Justice Research and Development. Literally, if you Google reentry reform, she's the top hit. So she's the expert in the field, everyone. So we're so thankful for her, and I can't wait to hear what wisdom she imparts on us. We are also lucky to be joined by Freda King. Freda King, like I said, is the project director at the Jail Reentry Network for Disc Village over in Tallahassee, providing programs for Wakulla County, Jefferson County, and Madison County jails. And she's going to share, I'm assuming, some of her personal experiences with criminal justice system, and then the work that she's doing in her program now. And we also have Katie Bohnett. She works with Reform Alliance. They're a great national organization doing all sorts of criminal justice reform initiatives, but she is the state organizer and lobbyist here in Florida, and she'll tell us more about their reentry reform efforts. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'm going to make Dr. Pettus-Davis the featured spotlight video, and if you'll go ahead and unmute, I'll send it over to you, Dr. Pettus-Davis.
All right, thank you. I'm used to people muting me instead of unmuting me, so I appreciate that, particularly my team members. So good afternoon, everybody. And I just want to start with an apology, because I hear that's always a good thing to do. I have to leave right at 1, so I'm not going to be here for the entire discussion, but hopefully we can have a little bit of discussion before I jump off too, if needed. So just so you know, I'm the founding executive director of the Institute for Justice Research and Development, like Amanda said, and our mission is really to use science to improve lives, communities, and institutions by developing and researching innovations. And really our goal is to reduce the unnecessary reliance on the criminal justice system and offer solutions to practitioners, advocates, policymakers who can adopt and apply those solutions in a way that results in equity and prosperity across race, socioeconomic status, behavioral health status. So we really do reform research across the entire criminal justice system. But today, what I really wanted to talk to you about is reentry. That's where the bulk of our work is, and it's where I've spent the majority of my time working over the past 20 years or so as a social worker, volunteer, and now as an academic. So one of the things that Amanda and I talked about was really me discussing some new approaches in reentry and kind of what the trends look like across the country. And we have, just so y'all know, although we're located at Florida State University, we have field-based teams in 10 states across the country, meaning they live there, they're working on reform there, they're delivering reentry services and researching reentry services. So we have this nice ability to kind of look at a bird's eye view, not only about what's going on nationally with other initiatives, but really seeing what our team members are seeing nationally as well. So looking from that kind of 20,000 foot perspective, one of the things that we keep seeing is being asked for or called for is really a more uniform model of reentry. So as many of you know, everybody kind of applies different approaches, and calls it reentry, but there's not really like there's a model for medication assisted treatment. There's not like a model necessarily of how you do reentry, and I think the lack of that model has really resulted in us having pretty inconsistent success rates with reentry programs, and also has contributed to this continued high reincarceration rate of individuals after an incarceration experience. The other piece that is increasingly coming into the consciousness of the American public, but also corrections professionals and reentry providers, is this need to address equity in our reentry approaches. So it's not enough, and this is something that perhaps I may say more so than other people, but it's not enough just to look at whether a reentry approach is working for individuals in general. We really have to look at whether our reentry reforms, both service delivery and policy reforms, are reducing inequities, reducing racial disparities, reducing economic disparities, reducing the disproportionate representation of people with behavioral health disorders in the criminal justice system. What people oftentimes do is just say like, oh, how do people in a certain group experience this reentry approach differently? That's not the right question to ask. The right question to ask is, are our reforms promoting equity across race, economic status, and behavioral health status? And I'll give you an example of the opposite. So the juvenile justice system really started their decarceration approach in the mid-90s, and across the country, nationally, if you look just at a numbers perspective, their decarceration efforts were highly successful at emptying out juvenile detention facilities. However, it was also largely a failed initiative, because when you look at who remained in the detention facilities, it was youth of color. So the reform efforts got the numbers down, but increased disparities. So this is something there is, more and more conversation about how when we do reentry reform in the adult system, we really want to make sure that it's reform that's promoting equity and not making things worse for certain people. And I will give you a stat, since there's several of us here in Tallahassee on the call. I don't believe these data are publicly available, but I was able to look at some data in terms of youth, since I'm talking about kids too, youth confined in the Leon County Jail. There's 14 of them under the age of 18, and all 14 of those individuals are Black males. Although everybody's quite accustomed to hearing the statistic about the overrepresentation of Black and African American men and women in criminal justice system, 100% representation is very unusual. So to have 100% of those kids be kids of color, it should be pretty shocking to people, in the sense of whatever is happening around reform efforts for disparities in that case is not working. So it's something we need to be very, very conscious of. And again, I think there's more and more dialogue throughout the country and efforts and advocacy efforts to pay attention to this. Switching gears a little bit, another conversation that's happening a lot with heads of corrections, with researchers, and what reentry providers kind of already know intuitively, is that although our measures of success tend to be very much so based in what people refer to as recidivism, even though everybody, as you all know, defines recidivism very differently, there's a lot of conversation now about the appropriateness of using recidivism as an outcome variable or an outcome measure. And what that conversation is about is the fact that when we say recidivism, we are oftentimes talking about individual behavior, right? Like we think that recidivism is reflecting individual behavior and the success or not success of that individual or the program that is serving that individual. that when you actually look at the reasons why people are becoming reincarcerated, recidivism is rarely a reflection solely of an individual's behavior. What recidivism is a reflection of is the policies and practices within that system, the characteristics of the officer that is either supervising or coming into contact with an individual, and an individual's behavior. It's a metric that looks at the interaction between a system and policy and an individual's behavior. So, for example, when you hear lots of statistics about, nationally, how over half the people who are in prison and jail are in for a technical violation, the technical violation is the system's behavior. It's their policies, it's their practices intersecting with the individual's behavior. We also know that a lot of people are reincarcerated after they're released from incarceration because of outstanding warrants for behaviors that occurred prior to a person's incarceration experience. Therefore, you can't determine the success of a reentry program or even that individual based on behavior that they did prior to coming into contact with the reentry service provider or even prior to their release. So I strongly encourage you all to, stay, aware of the dialogue that's going on around the utility or lack thereof of recidivism. And also look at other measures of success in your programs. So other measures can be around community stability, meaning housing stability, employment stability, but also really around individual psychological, occupational, and social well-being. So that's the next point that I wanted to talk about real briefly. Is some of the research that we lead up is on a model for reentry called the 5 key model for reentry. And that model is based on a theoretical model that a team of researchers, formerly incarcerated individuals, corrections professionals, and reentry service providers started developing about 5 years ago. And essentially the theory behind that model says there's 5 key factors to psychological, social, and occupational well-being, that if we intervene on those 5 key factors, will create overall greater well-being in individuals getting out of incarceration. And if we increase their well-being or otherwise focus on what they can achieve, which is the opposite of what predominant R&R models focus on, but if we focus on what they can achieve, then we're going to see a reduced likelihood that they're engaging in criminal behavior and or that they're returning to incarceration based on their own behavior. So we've been actually testing this model in 7 states, 100 prisons, 21 urban and rural counties over the past 3 years. In our first phase of states it was 4 states, about 50 prisons. We just got the results back 2 days ago. And lo and behold, when you improve well-being, it's the greatest predictor of reductions in reincarceration and criminal behavior. So each of the 5 key factors in our research actually improved well-being for individuals, and individuals with improved well-being, every kind of unit increase of improved well-being was a reduction in their likelihood to engage in criminal behavior or reincarceration. So we are very excited about that because it provides an evidence-based alternative to focusing on deficits and risks and perpetuating stigma by accident when we talk about people's risks and deficits. So that's just something else to be keeping an eye out for. We are releasing those results at the end of December. I'm hoping people are sick of looking at each other and start Googling around and looking for research results on reentry and are able to see our report. So the final thing that I wanted to say, and then I think I'm about at my 10 minutes, maybe a couple minutes over. The final thing that I wanted to say is one of the things that has been really beneficial about being able to research across rural and urban communities across multiple states is that we're able to pretty confidently identify trends in reentry. And what we're continuing to see, and what's a little or a lot disheartening for me, just having done reentry work for the past 20 years, I would have thought this had changed once I landed in the ivory tower and wasn't out on the streets every day. But communities really still aren't, aren't taking responsibility for the success of people getting out of jails and prisons. Communities continue to place significant barriers for individuals. So what we're repeatedly being reminded of is that we can prepare individuals who are getting out, we can support them once they get out, but they continue to have doors closed to them once they get in the community. And so there really needs to be more concerted effort if we're ever going to be successful at making, you know, a person's incarceration experience a one-time event versus a multiple-time event, is we've got to open doors to opportunities in our communities. We've got to put pressure on our major institutions, such as institutions of employment, institutions of education, institutions of where people gather, churches, community centers, neighborhoods, to create opportunities for people who've experienced incarceration. If they ever want to see those individuals, their families, and the communities that we're all embedded in together really thrive. So I think that's a huge challenge for us in the reentry reform community, is to not only focus on the individuals, of course, we want to focus on them, but we actually benefit them and everybody else around them and ourselves if we're insisting that our communities start opening up doors. So thank you so much for this opportunity and for all your work.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate it. That was super informative, and I'm very excited to see your research results. So I'll be looking for those, but I could listen to you all day. I appreciate you taking the time and sharing your expertise, and hopefully we can continue the conversation when we have a little bit more time. But what I'll do is I'll go ahead and I'll pass on to Ms. Freda King at this point. Dr. Pettus-Davis, feel free to stay as long as you like, or feel free to leave as you need. Again, thank you for taking the time. So Freda, I'm going to move the spotlight video to you now, and feel free to take it away.
Thank you so very, very much. It's an honor and very humbling experience to be involved with such a great esteemed group of women. Dr. Carrie, we've met before. Kudos to you and all the great research you're doing. We do need to link up though, okay? We got to link up at some point. Currently, I am the project director. We actually received a BJA grant that we completed the process in March, right in the middle of when COVID was popping out. So thankfully we received it in October, but unfortunately, the program that I oversaw for 7.5 years for this village was titled the LIFT program. Very, very unique because we provided services inside and out. So I like to call it the inside and out program, right? So I say this to say, and I'll use Ms. Collins because I'm familiar with Ready for Work here in Tallahassee. They were providing services once a person was released, right? We provided services inside the facility, reentry classes, 10-week classes. We covered employability, life skills, and vocational skills. And then we started their pre-release case plan while they were in the facility. And the clients, I call them clients, I don't like inmates and offenders, but the clients had 70% of what they wanted to achieve. And then me being who I am, hypothetically, I have a 50-year-old person been using drugs for 30 years and they say they're cured. I'm like, well, no. Let's just think about maybe just get an assessment, right? And we'll go from there. So I kind of gently moved them into that area. That program was not refunded due to just some, I like to just say people don't know how to play in the sandbox sometime, okay? So with that being said, right after that was, defunded, we got the BJA grant. I was actually moving into a different phase in my life, and I'll tell you why. I'm 55 years young. I'll be 56 in less than 30 days, and I'll tell you about a little bit about my journey, that I really wanted to focus on my speaking and training business, Freda Speaks. I get paid to do speaking engagements, training. I had a couple of contracts. Now I got to flip it around to virtual now since you can't be in person. But what I saw was that people really didn't understand the difference between case management and a referral. A referral is when you say, go here and talk to Katie and she'll tell you how to hopefully fill out your SSI form. Hopefully. Katie's like, oh, I've never done that before, so just come back later. That is not what we do. I have trained and taught at the Florida Behavioral Conference. If you're familiar with that, it's in Orlando. It's a huge conference. I've been very honored to be able to teach and train intensive case management. That is one of the keys to success when a person leaves the criminal justice system. You cannot give these men and women a piece of paper and say, call a number, because as we all know, you call the number, you're on hold for 45 minutes, then it clicks off, and then I call back. I'm like, I am so sorry. I think we got disconnected. And my clients are like, they hung up on you, Mrs. King. I said, it probably did, but we gonna call back and be nice. And they always say, if it wasn't for you and your staff and what you do, we would have given up a long time ago. So I am a huge proponent of case management. I love that the criminal justice movement is recognizing the importance of case management. So with my 20-year plus year of addiction, March has been 20 years of sobriety for me. Very, very dark, a lot of sexual trauma, physical trauma, poverty. When we talk about trauma, you know, people always go back to the 60s when we first started recognizing trauma or PTSD because of our wonderful troops that served. And then they came back and people are like, what's wrong with them, right? So now we know that trauma encompasses poverty, lack of education, not having stable housing, unhealthy parents. I never like to call a parent bad because I was labeled as a bad parent because I lost custody of my children to their father because I was unhealthy. There was no one for me to call when I was 5 years old to say I was being sexually assaulted by a family member. When I was raped, there was no 211. So everything was suppressed in me. And it's a natural correlation for many people like me to turn to drugs, criminal lifestyle in order to feel better, or we don't even care about how we feel because we've been told that we're nothing, right? If you've been told you're nothing for 20 years, you're going to behave like you're nothing. So dropping out of school at 15 years old, it was, you know, I was just like, you know what, I can't do this. I was picked on because I had what we call repeats. If you don't know what that means, sometimes you had to wear the same clothing in a week, and I was angry and just, you know, rebellious. I'm just gonna tell you, I was a hot mess. Okay, I didn't listen to anybody, and my mother was great. She was an awesome woman. She's no longer with us. So what I did when I moved to Tallahassee and got this awesome opportunity to work with Governor Bush, which was just a miracle in itself. I can tell you about that later. I said, you know what? If I don't change, I'm going to die. I'm going to end up in federal prison, or I'm going to die, because this lifestyle, there's only two places you can go, right? You can recover, but most times, a lot of people I know, they died or they went to prison. So when I moved here, I got my GED, my AA, I continued on to get my BS, and then I got my master's degree in criminal justice studies at 53 years young. I'm an adjunct professor at TCC. I teach criminal justice and college success. So what my main focus is to help ensure that when our wonderful men and women, because I just want to say, Dr. Carrie, you know this, there are beautiful, wonderful men and women that are incarcerated. When I tell you, I have met some of the most brilliant, caring men and women that's incarcerated in the federal system, state system, and even at the local jails. They've been hurt, they haven't been heard, and they don't know what to do. So my whole focus is with the jail reentry network program that we received in October, which will cover Madison, Wakulla, and Jefferson County, will be the reentry classes. Because when I hear ready for work, right, when I hear that, and if there's nothing prior to ready for work, people are not going to stay on their job, because the way you communicate in the criminal justice system, it's like, I'm not doing that excuse my French, to hell with this. I'm not liking him. He's racist. He don't like me. I don't like her. She tried me. It's a whole lot of different verbiage. So we have to help ensure that our men and women understand and help teach them, guide them to another way to express that. Oh, someone. Oh, okay. All right. To express how can you convey your displeasure or your feelings of discrimination. A lot of times it may be, but sometimes it's within that person because they've been in the system so long. Mind you, if you've never worked in the criminal justice in a prison or jail, it is not like anything else. A lot of these men and women are treated horribly. And if anybody know me, you know I'm going to complain. I'm going to get your badge number. I'm going to say, sir, what's your name? I'm going to read it and I'm going to complain because it is not your place to discredit someone's opportunity to go to a class. I use that for an example at Leon County Detention Facility. Not a lot of them, but a few of them and the clients would tell us, Ms. King, the correctional officer that brought us here asked why we were going to your class because it wasn't going to do any good. I'm like, really? I said, I'm so sad you had that experience. I'm so glad you came and we're here to serve you. We're here to serve you. So that was my whole premise of that program, and it will be with this one as well. Me and my case managers will be there to serve those men and women. That is what we're doing. We want them to have as much help as we can on the inside, but we're going to do everything we can from housing. We have a little bit of money, and community partners are great. I have great community partners that have my same passion. With medication, filling out those documents, making sure that we are and we go with them to their probation officers, because a lot of time they're like, oh, you're here again, so let's see how long you're gonna last. So when my staff go, we're gonna say, hey, you know, Jim is with it is a LIFT program, and this is what we do, and we're gonna help you keep them on track so they don't reoffend. They're like, oh, they have support. They have support. So my Rolodex is nothing like Oprah's, but I got a pretty good Rolodex. Trust and believe that, honey. I got everybody from the public defender. I got the probation officer cell phone numbers. You name it, I got it. Katie, don't try to steal my Rolodex if I die before I'm 99, okay? Because I have to be able to meet with people to share my passion so we can help these men and women get out of the system and stay out. When we look at reentry, going back to ready for work, a person cannot be ready for work if they're still dealing with trauma, if they're still dealing with housing that is not stable housing, right? We want stable housing. I don't want you to go live with JoJo because JoJo is still selling dope. But to them, that's a safe place because that's been their friend for 20 years. So now I got to have a conversation on what's wrong with mom. Oh, mom got rules. She tells me what to do. And I'm like, well, you know what, sir? Please let me know because I haven't found a job or whatever job I've had where we haven't had to follow rules, right? So let's stay with mom just for a little bit, follow the rules, be respectful. I do family counseling with them. I let the mother know we don't want you to be a helicopter mom. Okay. They're 30 years old. They love you, but let them go outside. The lights, I mean, we don't do the lights on anymore, do we? When the lights go off, like, do they have to be in the house? Like, we gotta meet in the middle here. But again, they're afraid for their child, which I understand. I lost my son in 2010 in Afghanistan. At 23 years old. So I understand loving your children and wanting them to do well, right? But we also have to allow them to be a part of their journey, to be a part of their reentry plan, to be a part of what their future looks like. You name it, I've done it. Amanda, Katie, Shannon, and Miss Marianne. Going to FSU and fighting for a client to get back into school. We've been very, very successful. That program produced a lot of success, not only for me, but my staff. I always tell people, your program will be as successful as your staff. If you don't have a good staff around you, I don't care how wonderful you think you are, because a lot of people think they're wonderful, and I'm not saying they're not. But if you don't have a good staff, my staff has made me look really, really good. Even though I carry my own weight and I work 50 plus hours a week and all that stuff. That's why I'm not doing that anymore. I'm going to do part-time work now because I want to write my book and I get paid speaking engagements and I love teaching. So there's some other things that I want to do, you wonderful ladies, because living that 25 plus year lifestyle kind of cut into my time frame, if you know what I mean. So I got to get cracking here, right?
You're playing catch up now.
Yeah, I don't need to do anything that I didn't do that I shouldn't have done. I'm okay with that, right? It's some things that I want to do, I'm a woman of faith, and I believe that God has put me in this position so that I could do some things that he wants me to do in our community and even statewide. I've traveled to speak not only here in Florida, but also out of state, not only about my message, but training. Training is so important. Training is very, very important. And I take that very seriously. You got to dot all your I's and cross all your T's with that. Because if we don't have a trained, well, I'll put it this way, ladies. I will always tell people when when I'm hiring people, I can't teach you compassion and empathy and sympathy, but I can teach you the paperwork. I need people to come with those emotions, because if I get one of these eye rolls or, oh my gosh, like that's not going to work for my team, because I need for them to understand it's not about us. It's about our clients. And how can we change the look of what reentry looks like? I'm very, very pleased that the criminal justice movement is seeing how important it is not just to have programs when you get out, such as the wonderful program, Operation New Hope and Ready for Work, but we need to have programming on the inside and we have to have programming on the outside. So I'm so ecstatic to be able to spearhead this new project. Hopefully in the next couple of months, you got to do a lot of different things with federal grants. But I'm excited because now they're seeing, well, we need to help these men and women on the inside with pre-release case management. Do you have a place to stay? Can we set up their substance abuse counseling sessions, have their mental health things? We get clothes for them. I wash clothes for my clients because when I go to these thrift stores, I have great partners, but they smell like mothballs. Anybody notice that? And I can't have my clients when they're going on the interview smelling like mothballs. So I wash them. My husband is wonderful. He presses them. I got a whole team working for me, okay? He doesn't even get paid for it. But I thank him so much because he knows how I feel about the clients and how I want them to feel. And that is worthy.
Well, thank you. We thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to join us and share your expertise in this area.
Well, thank you. I know, I'm sorry if I took too long.
No. I love it. Thank you. We're so thankful. I just want to make sure we also have time for Katie to share as well. So I'm going
Katie doesn't need any time. Katie used to be my boss. Katie used to be my boss, so I can take some of her time. Well, anyway, thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you,
I
Freda.
really appreciate it. And I look forward to hopefully working or seeing you all in the future.
Absolutely. Thank you as well. Yes, stick around too for some question and answers if you have time, please. So Katie, I'm going to go ahead and spotlight you now, and you can tell us about the great work that Reform Alliance is doing.
Awesome. Well, Dr. Pettus-Davis and Freda are incredibly difficult acts to follow. So I will be as brief as possible to speak about the work that Reform Alliance is doing nationally and in Florida. But my name is Katie Bohnett, and I'm the state organizer here for Reform in Florida. Reform Alliance is a national organization with the mission of supervision reform, so parole and probation. It was founded based on the story of our co-founder, Meek Mill, the recording artist, his issues with technical violations, minor ones that carried some hefty sentences. He was fortunate to have the resources to fight back. But after they were successful with fighting back, he and several others on the board decided to get together, and how do they prevent that from happening again? So our mission is to go state by state, and we call it Fight Different, and see what we can do about state laws to reform the unjust cycle of probation and parole, more in Florida, more probation, right? Because it's a little different here. So to the point of fighting different, as many other organizations, and not just organizations, people had to do during the pandemic, we pivoted pretty quickly and worked with some other researchers and other groups on both sides of the aisle to put together the SAFER plan that we pushed nationally, protocols and recommendations to help fight the spread of COVID-19 in jails and prisons. In Florida, unfortunately, not all of them were adopted. A few of them were, and we certainly did our best to address with Secretary Inch and DeSantis, Governor DeSantis, what we hoped they would do. We are still actively pursuing that. Unfortunately, the spread has been pretty rough in Florida. We also took a different angle. We were very fortunate to partner with the National Sheriff's Association to distribute 8 million masks across the nation. Almost 500,000 went to Florida, and that wasn't just to county jails and city facilities. Also, several of them went to the Florida Department of Corrections, so they went to prisons as well. And those, of course, were not just for correctional officers. We certainly made sure as an organization that they went to those that were currently serving in those facilities, or serving time in those facilities as well. They had to be equally distributed. Let's see, we've had a couple successes this past year. We're still a relatively new organization, only a couple years old. In California was a fairly big one. There was a bill package, probably one of the biggest supervision reforms that state had seen in quite some time. That was 3-tiered, but the biggest probably win that came out of that is a cap on probation for most misdemeanors of 1 year, and most felonies at 2. We also had a couple wins in Louisiana this past year. Also some caps, certainly higher than they were in California, and the criteria was a little different, but certainly much lower than it was before. And also remote reporting, which was something that we've advocated for, remote reporting for probation, something that Reform has advocated for ahead of the pandemic, and certainly out of necessity, Florida and several other states have had to do. So hopefully we'll see a lot more states working towards that. Let's see. Reentry is certainly a huge part of what we think is an integral cog in the wheel of supervision reform. It's something that was pushed on me when I first started with reform, how active we are in our own states and our own communities, and working with other groups about reentry, and how we can best serve those that are currently serving under supervision, or done with their supervision. We really do think it's key, and we are very much looking forward to Dr. Pettus-Davis's research coming out, and hopefully can work with them in the future. And also too, we certainly working state by state. We hopefully next year may even have a federal bill in the works, which we'll work with other organizations. Hopefully, Operation New Hope being one of them. Many of those senior to me, Van Jones, who's our CEO, and Jessica Jackson, and who's in charge of the advocacy team, were a part of Cut 50. That was a part of the First Step Act that Operation New Hope worked with us. So hopefully we can work together again to get some good stuff passed federally as well. And, I think we're also always looking for stories to help us inform the policies that we write, not just in Florida, but in other states. but to make sure that everything is informed by those that have experienced the good and the bad, and how we can better change in the positive direction. So I hope I was as brief as possible, and hopefully we can open up to Q&A.
Yes, thank
for
you
having
so
me.
much. Again, Katie, thank you for sharing, and no need to be brief. You know, you guys are doing a lot of good work, and so we want to know all about it. So I do appreciate you wanting to bring others in though to the discussion. And so if anyone, we've heard a lot of really interesting things regarding reentry and reentry reform specifically. I'm wondering, does anyone have a question they want to start off with or a comment in response? Yeah.
I should have led with this because I wrote it down. I know Dr. Pettus-Davis had to hop off, but I'm going to drop her a line. I loved that. It was just like such an aha, and I'm going to use this quote in the future. And of course I'll cite her, but when she said the technical violation is the system, I thought that was just incredibly powerful. I was like, oh, wow, that was just really great. So I'm going to, again, follow up with her and let her know I'm going to borrow that, but of course attribute it to her. But anyway, I just wanted to add that. I was going to lead with
I think that was a really good takeaway too. And I like that she's talking about, you know, recidivism is the intersection between the system and the individual, right? And I think that is an important distinction as well.
And I just saw a question in the chat from Marianne. Hi, Marianne. We are not, we certainly, I think, are down the line. We'll work with other partners, corporate and otherwise, and individual donors, but right now funded by our board members. And like I said, Jay-Z and Meek Miller on the board. There's several other, Robert Kraft is on the board. Ruben is on the board. He was also a part of the legal team. He's the co-owner of the 76ers. Several others that I can't name them all off at the top of my head.
And Jones?
Well, he's the CEO. He's
okay.
So he actually gets paid, but
Okay.
he runs it. But he's the big boss. But that's how we are currently funded. And actually, to that point, the PPE distribution that we did with the National Sheriff's Association, we actually got $10 million from the Twitter CEO. Jack Dorsey, specifically for that. So we've been very fortunate. That's
awesome.
Yeah, it was, and hopefully we can do more. I mean, I shouldn't say hopefully because that means the problem's still there. But we not just masks, but there's some things in the works that we can distribute other PPE that are necessary for those in correctional facilities, both working there and serving.
Fantastic. Yeah, great. We'll keep up the good work. Anyone else want to interject? Reggie?
Yeah, I have a question for Katie. Do you guys have, we good seeing you again. Do you have with session coming up in Florida, do we have a platform yet? Or is there, are you involved in some of the criminal justice bills, reform bills that say are Brandis or Rusan or some of those guys are working on?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And I know we had talked about it previously, kind of, was this probably like early summer? It feels like the year all melts together. I think this upcoming year, we won't be running a bill of our own. We will be supporting some others, some that you might be familiar with, and we can certainly connect on it after the fact. But some others that are already out there or that we know are coming down the pipeline, and then of course to federally, there's a pretty big thing that's in the works that early on in the year that of course would love to share and with you all and get your support. But insofar as running our own, not this year, just because of even though we tried to get everything as ripe as we could, just because of leadership, it just didn't seem like the best year. But I'm still going to be around, and we'll be supporting some other groups that you guys are all very familiar with, and some other things that are cooking, and then of course hopefully the year after we can push one of our own. But more on that later.
And the reason I ask is that we're going to be focusing a lot more on the policy side as well. You know, reentry is our big thing. But we also realize that we have to get more involved in the policy change in order for the people that we help to have long-term success. And so we'll talk offline. I'll shoot you an email, schedule some time to talk more, because we have a few ideas. And our Jacksonville chamber they're all on board. They want to help push legislation as well. And so, you know, we feel like we can help build a coalition even more.
I absolutely, and like this, all those decisions were kind of like just very recently made. That's the only reason why you're just hearing about it. but it's still all great stuff. And again, any way that reform can support great stuff that's already out there, we're certainly committed to continue. We are certainly not leaving Florida anytime soon. I think, as I think you know, and several others on this call know, this is probably the most difficult state to get not just criminal justice reform, but anything passed. So it's a little bit more of a longer game here, but reform's still very much committed. So yes, but we will certainly talk after this.
It's funny you say that. We were talking to someone who runs a national foundation, and she was saying, look, we were trying to get some funding. So she said, look, if you can get stuff done in Florida, like it sends a shockwave to the nation because it's so tough. And so yeah, you're absolutely right.
I totally, and there's I think there's nothing about this current who's in leadership here in Florida that we didn't know before the election, right? Like that's even if the election would have gone in the entirely different direction in Florida, leadership would still be leadership, and so we already kind of knew, but I think it certainly cemented the possibility, and so, but that doesn't, again, we still want to continue to lay the groundwork for the following year, and again, I'll be here for that. So.
Great, thank you.
Good. Anyone else have any questions, comments, or something they'd like to raise here in relation to the discussion?
I actually have a question for Freda. Is there a reason? Is it because there's separate funding already for Leon that you're doing the other counties? Like, is there a reason that Leon County isn't in that group of the grant program that you're currently working on, the new one that you're working on?
So with this particular grant, as many people know or don't know, the larger cities tend to receive the more monies. But again, thankfully, BJA and the Bureau of Justice have found that the rural communities, for you that are not familiar, Madison County, so like Leon County Detention Facility, they can house up to 1,200 people, right? So Madison, there's around 120. Wakulla, they actually are the only county that has ICE people, so theirs can maybe go up to 200, but that's not, that's a different pot. So theirs is like 100, and then Jefferson is like 90. So they recognize that this population of people need help. So it was specifically for rural counties that had substance abuse issues that we know, just statistically speaking, 70% of people that are incarcerated have mental health or do a diagnosis, which is mental health and substance abuse issues. And the other 30% will probably be your Jeffrey Dahmers and, Ted Bunnett. I hate to use their names, but I just want y'all to understand the context that everyone that's in prison and jail, even if they have an aggravated assault with battery, we found that a lot of not only trauma, but also substance abuse and mental health issues. So this particular grant was for rural counties. And we were one of, I think they awarded 13, I want to say, in the nation. So it was really, really a huge win for us because we've never had a BJA grant before. We have other grants, SAMHSA, HRSA, and things like that. But that's particularly that. And I will be working with Leon, maybe on some other stuff reentry wise. But everything is kind of shut down as far as programming. So they're going to actually have tablets that they're going to do programming on. So I'm excited about that. But that is why Leon wasn't included in that pot, because they're not a rural county.
No, that makes total sense. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Go.
Just as a quick follow-up too, Freda, I know you serve on the board of BBART, and I remember when
I'm still on the board.
I voted for you.
Okay, thank you. Listen, Katie, I've tried to get fired so many times, but They won't fire me, so I'm just gonna have to stick with it, okay?
So I do remember the presentation about the tablets, and I just remember thinking that was so great. But how I am curious too. I mean, again, I've seen a couple presentations and heard some people speak to it, but like moving forward, how do you see COVID really changing, especially when we're talking about in correctional facilities, education, things like that you've done in the past that had to be in person, and now they're thinking about other ways, but visitation and what have you seen the effects of that be, and like where do you see hopefully the future of that, because I don't think we're out of this anytime soon.
It's horrible. It's horrible because as far as Leon and all of the facilities here, I think Gaston Correctional Reentry, they have now allowed one of our board members at BBART to come in on Sundays. He does 24/7 dads, but I mean, they have partitions and they're slowly, Leon, right now, I don't see any programming probably going on until April. It has affected it so much. Like so many of, even when my last class was in July, thankfully we got 8 weeks with Zoom, but they shut it down because of COVID. So it's having a huge impact because one, a lot, especially the rural counties, they don't have a lot of Zoom and access and things like that. We did a huge mail out from BBART that we actually sent personal letters, the BBART committee, to every single person in Leon County Detention Facility to say, hey, we're here. We got like 60 responses back, which is fine. But it was slow. It took like 2 months to do that. It took 2 months to do that. So COVID has really had a huge negative impact. What happened?
Well, I was actually, you're right. That's a great segue. And I hate to cut you off only because we do have our graduation, but that's a great segue to the next session that we plan on having on the social exchange, which will be regarding prioritizing COVID-19 vaccinations in our jails and prisons. So we are going to take a break in in January, and hopefully resume our conversations for the social exchange in February. So I would love to invite all of you to come back to join us for that conversation. Hopefully by then, our system will have prioritized the jails and prisons for vaccination, but if not, we'll have a real lively discussion, I'm sure, at that point. So, and again, Ms. King, excuse me for interrupting.
No,
I am so
Amanda, I just
thankful.
want to say one last thing. Whoever the Tallahassee people, Katie, you and I can talk, you're a part of BBART. We are going to have to really fight for our people that's inside the facility, not only for vaccines. That's going to be down the line. That discussion is not going to be had for a long time. But how can we help them being incarcerated for such a long time with no human, per se, contact with their families, which is definitely going to have a big impact on them as they get ready to be released. So I think that's a great conversation to have later. And thank you all so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you, Katie. Thank you to Dr. Pettus-Davis, who had to leave. Thank you to each of you too for joining us. Really, this is important. If you want to share the conversation, I'll have it on our website, hopefully by the end of the day on the social exchange page. So for anybody that that might have not been able to join the conversation, please do share it with them, and be sure to share future conversations with them. The more the merrier in this regard.
Congratulations on your graduation.
Thank you. We're excited for our clients. So thank you, and have a wonderful holiday season, and check back soon.
All right.
Thanks for having
Be
us.
safe, everybody.
You as well. Stay well.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.